I've had as I say, a wonderful journey, and still having it. I started off, can you hear me, by the way? All right. I started off not really wanting to be a photographer, not even thinking about being a painter or poet or writer or anything of that sort. It all sort of happened accidentally. Providence took care of things after my mother died, and I was 15. And her last request was that I be shipped from Kansas to Minnesota. And she wanted me shipped to Minnesota because she thought that it was a better land for me to live in, because I had suffered a lot of discrimination and bigotry in Kansas, little Fort Scott, Kansas, a little town. And she wanted me taken to Minnesota right after she was buried. And that's what my father sent me there to do that. I remember Fort Scott, Kansas very vividly. I'm sort of a hero there now. They want to make Fort Scott a Gordon Parks Day soon. But I do remember that there were segregated schools up until high school. I don't think that the only reason we didn't have a segregated high school was because the town fathers couldn't raise enough money to build another school. But if you can imagine it, the black kids were denied a chance to participate in athletics or any of the activities that went on at school. So it was a miserable life. Some kids had wiped them out. For me, for some reason or another, it gave me more determination. And I thank my mother and my father for that. By the way, I'm my father's 15th child. 7 boys and 8 girls. So when my mother died, there was a lot of work left. And she felt that somehow or other she should give me as much as she possibly could before she died, and she did. There's one thing she taught me that stayed with me, that I should never have ill feelings against another person because of the color of their skin. I remember once when Walter Wade, a little blonde boy who was suffering because both of his parents had gotten into trouble, and there's no place for Waldo to stay. Waldo and I shot marbles together, we went fishing together, and my mother brought Waldo home to live with us for 3 months. The whites didn't like it, the blacks didn't like it. My mother didn't care what they wanted. Waldo needed a home, and she gave Waldo a home, and Waldo never, ever forgot her for that. So that's the kind of woman she was. That's the kind of person my father was, and all my brothers and sisters. I was fortunate to have been brought up with such beautiful parents and beautiful brothers and sisters. I think that my first, to be very frank, when I got to Minnesota to live with my sister, my brother-in-law, who did not like children at all, let me know the first night I was in Minnesota that I was not welcome. I was only 15. And on one cold night, 35 degrees below zero in Minnesota, that's cold, we had an argument and he kicked me out of the house and threw my bags out the window. I stayed at a pool hall all night and rode the streetcars between St. Paul and Minneapolis all night. Smart move. Some people say later, said, "Don't you hate David Grissom for doing that to you when you were a kid?" I said, I didn't like it, but maybe David gave me an early start. I realized I had to get going. No more schooling, no more anything for a while, but trying to survive. And perhaps the thing that helped me survive, and no doubt it did, was the fact that I had learned to plunk on the piano when I was 6 years old. And I got a job in a house of ill repute playing the piano. I survived. Until one night a guy had his throat cut in there, and I got out of there and then never went back. But I finally landed a job as a waiter on the railway. The North Coast Limited it was called, and it ran between St. Paul and Seattle, Washington. And later on I got a job on a train called the 400 running between Chicago and St. Paul. But on my layovers, since I was the youngest on the crew, I would usually go to the art galleries, which I'd never had a chance to see before. I would go to a motion picture house and watch the film. And one day when I was at the motion picture house during the layover, I saw a newsreel about the bombing of the American gunboat, the Panay, by the Japanese. And the photographer had stayed by his post until the gunboat sank. Did a marvelous job. And they announced over the intercom of the theater right after he got through showing it that Norman Alley was in the audience. And he jumped out on the stage and he got marvelous applause the way you gave me just now. And I thought that was wonderful. That's pretty glamorous. He had a white suit on, too. So when I got to Seattle, first thing I did was go to a pawn shop and purchased myself a $7.50 camera. And immediately that afternoon, trying to shoot seagulls, I fell into Puget Sound. And some fishermen had to drag me out. But I held the camera high so it wouldn't get wet. And I got back to St. Paul. I took my film to Eastman Kodak. I didn't even know how to unload it. And the Eastman Kodak clerk asked me if it was my first work. And I said, yes. He said, you sure? I said, yes, my first. He said, this is good. He said, if you keep it up, we'll give you a show. Well, I kept it up, and they gave me a show in the windows in Minneapolis. I got pretty cocky then. I was walking down the street one day with my $7.50 camera, and I saw the sign that said Frank Murphy's. It was probably the most expensive store for women in the Northwest. And something or another says, go in. I walked in and I asked for Frank Murphy. He appeared in a gray flannel suit, sort of like this. And he says, what do you want? Looked at me as though I was an insect. He said, what do you want? I said, I want to shoot fashions for you. He said, we get our fashions done in New York and Paris and London. And I felt smaller and smaller and smaller. And it just about had me kicked out the door when Madeline, his wife, said, Frank, what does the young man want? You know, he wants to shoot fashions. She says, well, Frank, how do you know he can't shoot fashions? She says, come here, young man. Can you shoot fashions? I lied and said, yes, ma'am. You got any work with you? No, ma'am. No work with you, no. Well, what makes you think you can shoot fashions? Oh, I said, I read Harper's Bazaar and Vogue, and she knows the magazines. She says, Frank groaned. She says, I'm going to give you a chance. Now, you'll be back here tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. The store closes. And I'll have the models here. How many models do you want? 3. What kind of clothes do you want? Formal. How many gowns do you want? 12. So, okay, you be sure to be here no later than 6:30, okay? Everything will be here. I said, yeah, well, Frank groaned again. So I hurried back to Minneapolis to see a friend of mine. His name was Harvey Goldstein, who owned a little camera shop. And Harvey lent me money, he lent me film, he lent me everything. When I told him I was going to shoot fashions for Frank Murphy's, he says, man, are you crazy? He says, you haven't got a camera, you don't have film, you don't have lights, and you can't shoot fashion. I said, Harvey, you take care of all the rest of it. The fashion stay to me, I'll take care of that. Okay, he says, I'll take you over, but I'm not going in that store. I'll drop you off at the curb. I said, okay. Well, frankly, I was frightened. You know, I didn't expect it to happen like that. Well, I walked in. Madeline Murphy looked like she was 8 feet tall. My savior, Frank, was still smirking in the corner. She said, are you ready? I said, yes, ma'am. Well, the models were there. They dressed the models and everything. I started shooting. Madeline was impressed. Frank was impressed. Even I was impressed. Until about 12 o'clock that night when I was developing the film, I found out I had double exposed everything but one picture. I called up Harvey at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, Harvey, I goofed. He said, what's wrong? I said, everything's double exposed but one picture. Well, what do you call me, man? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, I know, Harvey, but you got to help me. How can I help you? Take this one print that's good and make me a 16 by 20 of it. And I'm going to put it on the easel and have it in front of Murphy's store tomorrow morning when they get there. Man, are you crazy? I said, no, that's got to do it, Harvey. He said, okay, come on over here. So I was there with 16 by 20 print in front of Murphy's when Frank and Madeline arrived the next morning. She said, oh, Gordon, how beautiful. Where are the rest of them? I told her the truth. She said, well, they've all been this good? I said, that's the worst one of all. She said, okay, we'll do it all over again, but no double exposures. I said, all right. So she had me back, and I did them, and I didn't have any double exposures the next time. I had a better camera, Harvey lent me, and everything. And Marva Lewis, Joe Lewis's wife, who was then the champion of the world, a boxer, she came to St. Paul, and she saw my work in Murphy's because Madeline put it all around the stores. She invited me to come to Chicago. I went to Chicago, but I didn't shoot many fashions there. I became more involved with poverty that I saw on the south side of Chicago. And I shot a lot of that, and it enabled me to get the first Julius Rosenwald Fellowship in photography. And on the trains, when I was a waiter, I used to see beautiful pictures by the Farm Security Administration photographers who were then the most prominent documentary photographers in the world. Dorothea Lange, Arthur Rothstein, and all that group. And I could see what they were doing with the camera about poverty-stricken people across the country, especially farmers who were losing their land. And I felt somehow this could be a good weapon against bigotry and against discrimination. I didn't think of it as thoroughly as that, but it did strike me. But in any case, I was fortunate enough to get a Rosenwald Fellowship, and believe it or not, Roy Stryker accepted me at the Farm Security Administration in Washington. He was then a protege of Rexford Tugwell, who was a protege of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it was a great chance for me. There I learned about photographing human beings and their problems, and I think that more than anything else set me straight about that. I stayed there for a while. Eventually I went to work with the Office of War Information under Elmer Davis, and I was a war correspondent for the Office of War Information for a while, but I was refused a chance to go overseas with the first black fighter group because there were some white Southern congressmen and senators who didn't want the black pilots to get that kind of publicity and especially have the government pay for it. So I was taken out of port of invocation and went back to New York. And so I remember the first place I went to was Harper's Bazaar with what fashion I had done with for Mrs. Murphy. Alexander Brodovich, who was a very famous art director, looked at my work, walked around the table a couple of times, lit a cigarette, and he said, "It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But we got a problem." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, we're owned by Hearst organization, and they don't hire black people to do anything, not even sweep the floor. I said, we both have a problem, don't we? And he said, I don't really feel that way. He said, I'm from Russia? I said, yeah. But there's nothing I can do about it. I said, well, I understand that. And I took my work and bid him goodbye. That same afternoon, I went to see Alex Lieberman at Vogue. Alex was sitting behind his beautiful desk, smoking a cigarette. And I walked in, showed him my work. And he said, very beautiful, very beautiful. I said, well, here it comes again. And he said, we're going to give you a chance, just like that. And I worked for Vogue for the next 5 years. So it shows you the difference. It shows you the people who helped me along the way. They were of different color skin. Black people helped me, red people helped me, white people helped me. Madeline and Frank were both Irish. Goldstein was Jewish. Lieberman was a Russian. And it taught me a lesson, you know, that stayed with me for a long time. When people ask me later on in my life, after they'd read one of my biographies, if I didn't hate white people, I said, how could I hate white people? And especially that's reinforced this evening when you see my family, you know, hating my own people, you know, impossible, you know. But in any case, I eventually had that yen to work for the most famous magazine in the world, which was Life. And I didn't have the nerve or the courage at first to go in and say, give me an appointment. But I did a very rare thing. I walked into the Time Life building, got to the 31st floor, saw a young lady with an armful of letters and packages, and I asked her where Wilson Hicks's office was. He was the picture editor, and the toughest picture editor Life magazine ever had. He was really tough. I walked into his office, and I said, Mr. Hicks? He looked up and he said, yep. I said, I'd like for you to look at some of my pictures. He said, who are you? I said, my name is Gordon Parks. He said, how'd you get in here? I said, I just walked in. He said, well, walk the hell out. I said, won't you look at my pictures, just one or two of them? He said, well, why did you ask for an appointment? I said, well, I didn't think you'd give me one. Well, how many pictures you got? I said, oh, about 24. He said, well, I'll look at one of them. And he looked at the first one. He turned it over and he looked at the second one and the third. He kept on. He looked through the whole group. He said, just a minute. He called up Sally Kirkland, who was the fashion editor, and he called up John Dilley, who was the documentary editor. He said, come into my office. He walked in and says, look at these pictures to Sally, the fashion pictures and the documentary stuff I'd done for FSA to John Dilley. So Sally says, oh, Wilson, you're wonderful. And we're going to do the Paris collection in about 4 weeks, and we need a photographer. We don't want to hire an outside photographer because we don't have any Life photographers who do fashion. Wilson said, okay. How about you, John? And John says, well, I want to do a crime series, and I think perhaps he could do that. That gave me an idea. My brain started ticking and thinking of Madeline Murphy. He says, what do you want to do to me? I said, oh, I wanted to do the crime story in Harlem for a long time. Well, 3 seconds before that, I had never thought of Harlem. He said, we tried that last year, and one of the boys turned out to be a minister's son, and we got sued for $3 million, and we had to pay. Now, you telling me you can do it? I said, oh, yeah, I know I can do it. I didn't think I could, but I was in there, bluffing my way. But he said, okay. give you $500. $500? I said, that'll last about one day with the gang. And so John Dilly says, take it, take it. I said, but John, you know, $500. He said, just take it, take my word, just take it. I said, okay, I take it. When we got outside, I asked Dilly, why would you encourage me to take $500? You know that's not going to last. He said, because you are on an expense account, and which makes you immediately the highest paid life photographer. You can have for what you want. And both stores were successful. I found it strange shooting fashions one day and crime the next. But I went to Paris with Sally, and while I was on the boat going over, Wilson called the boat, the Queen Mary I was on, offered me a job on the magazine. And Sally said, don't take it now, don't take it. I said, don't take it? She said, no, don't take it. Wait till you finish the story in Paris. So we finished the story in Paris, and I was sent down to shoot Ingrid Bergman while I was in Paris, because Bergman had seen my, the first story I did for Life, and she wanted to know if I would come to Stromboli because she was having the great love affair with Roberto Rossellini, and they'd kicked all the newsmen off the island, and she wanted somebody on there she could trust, and she felt she could trust me. So Life cabled me to go to Stromboli in Sicily, and I went. But meanwhile, when we got back to Paris, Wilson's second wire was there, offering me a certain amount of money, and Sally said, tell him yes, you accept, but on your own terms. I said, Sally, come on. He said, no, do it. And so I did it, and I got it, you know. But at Stromboli, I had a wonderful time there. Ingrid Bergman was a wonderful woman to work with. Rossellini was stubborn, and they felt the whole world was against them, and in a way it was. She had left her husband and was now with Rossellini living on Stromboli while the picture was being made, and they didn't trust anybody. One day, but I was sent there actually, beside by Life, to get what everybody else wanted to get, and for the same reason that everybody was kicked off the island. They wanted a picture of Bergman and Rossellini together. I knew that. And I headed for that moment to come because Bergman and I become such good friends. So one day it happened. Everybody had left the movie set but the two of them, and they didn't know I was in the back room loading a camera. And I came out and they were embracing. It was not a sexual embrace or a sensual embrace. It was just, oh my God, the whole world is against us. And I had a 35 millimeter camera in my hand. I started to shoot, and I put it in my pocket. It was not the time to betray her. That Sunday morning, she came to my house. She said, Gordon, Roberta and I are going for a walk on the beach. Would you like to come with us? I said, yeah. She said, bring your camera. We want some pictures together. So I got what I wanted. And that incident followed me all the way through my career. I never let my camera intrude upon people who don't want to be photographed. I try to make friends with them. I don't forget them. After Life magazine, for instance, had done a story, I remembered that family. Any help I could be to that family, I tried to be. It happened with Red Jackson, the Harlem gang leader. It happened with Flavio de Silva, a little Brazilian boy I found dying outside of Rio, who I brought to America. To his cure, he was dying from asthma and bronchial asthma and tuberculosis. And Americans sent me $30,000 in less than 3 weeks to go back and get Flavio. The doctors in Brazil warned me against bringing him here. They said, he'll die on your hands. And I said, well, I have to take that chance. Flavio was 12 years old when I found him, taking care of his brothers and sisters, of which there were 7. His mother and father worked at the bottom of the hill selling kerosene. And they lived at the top of the mountain in one little shack, which was about 12 feet, 20 feet. I slept on the floor, and a Cable Life magazine, who had sent me there to do a story on poverty in Latin America, and told them that I had interviewed several fathers, but none of them really was what I wanted. But I did find this beautiful little boy who was dying, and that was the worst poverty I'd ever seen as I emerged in that shack. And they said, okay, it's your story. Stay as long as you want to and do it. And when I was published, as I say, Americans, people sent me over $30,000 in 3 weeks, and Life gave me another $40,000, and I went back, I bought them a home, moved them out of the favela, brought Flavio to America, to the Denver clinic. He was cured. Just recently, HBO did a film on me, and they sent me back to see Flavio in Brazil and his family. Flavio lived. He has 3 beautiful children now, and the whole family, about 15 of them live in that house, but at least they're all alive. It didn't always turn out that way. For instance, the Fontenelle family, a black family in Harlem, which was impoverished, same number of kids in the family. Life again gave me money to rescue that family. I bought them a home as well as they bought Flavio a home, but the father came home one night celebrating a job that I had gotten for him, lit a cigarette and dropped it in the sofa, burned the whole house down. He died in the fire, little Kenneth died in the fire. Eventually 3 girls died from AIDS. 1 boy died from gunshots. The mother died from she was a diabetic and also cancer. So that whole family was wiped out except one little boy called Richard. And the mother always had faith in Richard, and she said, he's going to be something. Not any of the rest of my children, but Richard will amount to something. And Richard is amounting to something. He now has his own family. He wants to be a composer. He comes to see me. I bought him some recording equipment, and he's doing very well. And again, you know, that family is part of my family, what's left of Flavio's family. And that's the way it's happened. As far as the musical part of my family, as I told you, I started playing when I was six years old. My father didn't like a boy playing the piano. He thought I should be out watering the hogs and feeding the chickens. But when my mother was around, I played the piano. Sarah Parks was the boss. And when she said something happened, it happened. And I played the piano, thank God. But it was, as I say, a wonderful family. My father didn't say perhaps more than 20,000 words to me during his whole lifetime. Did you feed the hogs, boy? Yes, sir. Did you feed the cows? Yes, sir. How about the chickens? Yes, sir. Okay, Papa, can I have 5 cents? 5 cents for what? Peanut brittle. Oh my God, here's 3 cents. And that's the way it was, but he was a wonderful father. I remember the first picture that I took of him, he had never seen a camera before. He says, what's that gadget? I said, it's a camera, Papa. He says, why you got it pointed at me? I said, I'm going to take your picture. He said, oh, okay, I'll take my picture? I said, yeah. So that's in my book. That's one of the first pictures I ever made of my father. And he was, as I say, a wonderful, wonderful man. The writing came about in a strange way. I've been working for Life for a number of years. One of my best friends was a photographer there by the name of Carl Maidans, who was a good writer and a good photographer. And he said, you know, we talk of your existence in Kansas. You have a novel. Why don't you write it? Did you ever write a novel? I said, no, Carl, I can't write a novel. He said, why don't you go home this weekend and try? I said, are you kidding? He said, no, go home this weekend and try. Well, I went home that weekend and I tried. I wrote, I think it was 7 triple-space pages. And I took it to Carl on Monday and showed it to him. He said, I see. Mind if I show this to someone? I said, no. So on Wednesday, I got a call from a gentleman who said his name was Evan Thomas. And he said, I want to take you to lunch. I said, well, why do you want to take me to lunch? He said, well, you will see when we get there. He said, I said, who are you, Mr. Thomas? He said, I'm a friend of Carl Mylands. I said, well, that's good enough for me. So I went to Carl. I said, Carl, I got a call from Evan Thomas. He wants to take me to lunch. He said, do you know who that is? I said, no. He said, that's the executive vice president of Harper & Row Publishing Company. I said, well, you better go to lunch with me. He said, yeah, I guess I had. I said, no. We went to lunch. We were taking off our wraps. We met Evan. As we were taking off our coats, he said, now listen, you've never written a novel before. You've never written anything before. I said, that's right. He said, we're going to offer you $5,000 for your first book. And you must remember, you've had no experience. I said, but Mr. Thomas, he says, come on back. Well, Carl was like this. He couldn't believe it. And I said, Mr. Thomas, he said, no, I tell you what, $7,500. I said, but Mr. Thomas, what I'm trying to tell you, he says, come on back to the table. We went back, we got to the table. He said, now the most I can offer you is $10,000. That is absolutely the most, that's as far as I go. You've never written anything before, and I'm taking a chance. I said, well, Mr. Thomas, I appreciate that very much. And, you know, I have never written anything, I've never written anything before, but since you offered all that money, I'm damn well going to try. So I will accept. Well, Ace gave me a fine editor, who was Jean Young, a Chinese lady, who I eventually married. And when I finished, she told him, she says, you know, he's not going to write any more. We might as well go with what we've got, because he doesn't know how to rewrite. He's not interested in rewriting. He's puts it down, and that's where we're going to have to go. We might as well go to print right away. So he went to print right away, and it became a bestseller. And then Harper & Row rushed me into doing our choice of weapons, which was about the weapons I chose to fight discrimination, bigotry, and poverty. I felt that it was more forceful than the gun or the knife, and I utilized it. During my period with Life, I met Malcolm X. Life wanted to do all the black militants, but they knew they couldn't get in. They tried for 2 years to get with the black Muslims, but they didn't ask me. So one day they said, Gordon, we'd like to do the black Muslims and the Panthers and the rest of them, but can't get in. You think you can get in the Muslims with a white reporter? I said, no. You think you can get in with a black reporter? I said, I don't know whether I can get in at all. I said, no, I'm working on a white team, you're on a black team. And they don't look at you as saviors. I said, I can try. They said, well, why don't you try? I said, where do you want me to start? They said, we'll start with Malcolm X and the Muslims. I went up to Harlem that afternoon. Malcolm was cussing out about 15 white cops on horseback with guns on their hips. And there was a vast audience at 125th Street. I looked at this guy and I said, well, he's asking for an early death, you know. And so when he came down, I went up and introduced myself. He said, yeah, I heard about you. He says, what do you want out of me? I said, well, I want to do a story on the black Muslims. He said, well, a lot of people want to do that. I said, yeah. I said, but I really want it bad. He said, well, I think you can do a good job. but I can't give you permission. You have to go to Elijah Muhammad. He's out in Arizona suffering from asthma. I said, would you go with me on a plane? He said, yeah, I'll fly out with you. We went out to see Elijah Muhammad. He's a very small man, bow tie, looked like a little Harvard professor. He came and said, hello. How do you do, sir? You Gordon Parks? I said, yes, sir. Why are you working for the White Devils? That was his greeting. I told him a bit about, getting inside, He said, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. You're working for the White Devils. And so, in less than 20 minutes, Malcolm and I were headed back to the car toward New York. And Malcolm says on the plane to me, he said, well, I think he liked you. I said, well, if he did, he had a damn poor way of showing it. So he said, I think he'll invite you back. And sure enough, the following week, Elijah Muhammad invited me back. He said, young man, I'm going to offer you $500,000 to do a film on the black Muslim movement and write a book. Are you willing to do that for $500,000? I said, well, I'm very honored, very flattered, in fact. I said, but I'm afraid you would try to influence me. And I'm a reporter. He says, you can bet your life if I give you $500,000, I'm going to try to influence you. So Malcolm and I were headed back toward the car. He said, just a minute, young man. He says, I like the fact that you're a young black man, that you turned down $500,000. He said, now I'm going to give you a chance to go through the world of Islam. If I like what you do, I'm going to send you a box of cigars. If we don't like what you're going to do, we're coming out to visit you. Well, that's the way I got with the Muslims. One night, I'd been in Los Angeles with Malcolm during the trial when some of the Muslims were shot up by cops in Los Angeles. I'd been through the trials with Malcolm. And we're on a plane coming back to New York on the late plane. And he was very sleepy and tired. He said, he'd been calling me Mr. Parks all along. He was never Gordon. No matter what I said, he was always Mr. Parks. Very polite, cold Mr. Parks. This night he said, brother, I want you, my daughter needs a godson, Kobila. I elect you, how about it? I said, well, I'd be honored, Malcolm. So we got off the plane in New York. I said, Malcolm, you called me brother last night for the first time. He said, well, the first time you earned it. I said, so Kobila became my goddaughter. And I was with Malcolm the day before he was killed. He came to my house and told me that he was feared for his life, and he feared for his family's welfare. And I had no idea that he would be killed the next day, but I wasn't there. But I've stayed very close to Kobila through all of our trials, and it was her son who destroyed the mother a little while back, and she reports to me about every month on his welfare and so forth. So unfortunately, the girls don't get along. They should be together now. They should be stronger than ever with Betty gone and Malcolm gone, but they're apart. And it pains me to see that. I'm making an effort to get them back together again. I went with the Panthers after the story on the Muslims came out. And I remember one night I was riding with the Panthers, and the cops were following us. It was storming. And one of the young Black Panthers said to me, I read your book, A Choice of Weapons. If you wrote it tomorrow the way you wrote it a couple of years ago, would you write it the same way with all those honky cops with their guns trained on us, following us? I said, well, you got a .45 automatic on your lap. I have a 35 millimeter camera. I I think my weapon is stronger than yours. So the Panthers in front, they turned around, they sort of scoffed. But 2 weeks later, this young man was killed in an ambush by the police in Los Angeles. My story was published around the world, so in that particular case, it was a stronger weapon. And I had to tell the Panthers and the Muslims and all the Stokely Carmichael and all the rest that I worked with at that time that I was there as a reporter, not a black reporter, but as a reporter, because I knew that Life magazine was looking at me and wondering about, well, should we hire another black to replace him? Is he going to betray us and do the same and not come through when he should have come through as a reporter? And I did it partially to protect anybody who was going to follow me into Life magazine. And I'm happy about that. I'm happy about it today. And there were blacks who did follow me into Life. And I'm happy about that. The motion pictures was a strange thing. You know, Bill was asking me a bit today about how things happened to me in my life. The Providence took care of me. After my mother died, that was it, you know. I had to do everything that I possibly could to survive. There was no genius attached to it. He called me a Renaissance man. I don't know how to spell Renaissance yet. You know? But it was a matter of surviving. I had written a choice of weapons, The Learning Tree, several books. And John Cassavetes, the actor, called me from California in New York and said, Gordon, I read The Learning Tree. You have to make a film of that. I said, John, I would love to see someone make a film of it, but I can't make it. I said, you know, there are no black directors in Hollywood. He says, I know that, but can you get out here day after tomorrow? And I said, yes. He said, well, come straight to Warner Brothers studio, and I will be there. Kenny Hyman running the studio, and his father owns Warner Brothers. Kenny and I don't speak to one another right now, but I will introduce him to you, and I will leave. I said, you sure you want me to do this? He says, yeah. So I said, okay, I'll be there. I arrived at Warner Brothers. Johnny Cassavetes was there. He introduced me to Hyman, and John left. And Kenny Hyman had on his desk The Learning Tree and a choice of weapons. He says, which one of these do you want to do first? I said, I didn't come all the way out here just to play, you know, because this is really Hollywood hype. He says, no, I'm serious. Which one would you like to do first? I said, you talk about me directing it? He says, yes. I said, but I've never directed a picture. He said, I know that. I said, okay. He said, would you like to find me to find a screenwriter? I said, I don't know anybody out here. You'd have to. He said, well, you wrote the book. Why don't you write the screenplay? I said, okay. He says, now, Cassavetes tells me you're a composer. Mm-hmm. You want me to compose the music for? That's right. I said, all right. I figured he's really lying to me now. He's really carrying a lie too far, you know. And he said, now you're going to be the first black director to come from Hollywood, and I suggest that you produce it for Warner Brothers. I said, why not? Well, that's the way it happened. Kenny Hyman told me that you're in charge. You're going to be the first black director here. It's your story. You tell it the way you want to tell it. And I'm behind you 100%. And Kenny Hyman was behind me 100%. And I made the picture. Eventually, the Library of Congress voted it one of the 25 most important pictures ever made. And I was very happy about that. That's the way I got started. The next thing I did was Shaft and, you know, Lead Belly and several other films. But that's the way it started. And I think after this experience, and I'd like to tell you that, and I certainly tell a lot of young people in the universities and colleges, you can do it just about anything if you really tried. So many people want to do this, they want to do that, they want to write a novel, they want to write poetry, but they're afraid. If they just picked up the pen and tried, like I did, they could do it as well as I did. I was talking to my great-grandson here. If I was as smart as he was at his age, I would have been a whiz, you know, but he's real bright. And my great-great-granddaughter, Aubrey, startles me. She's a little over a year old. Six.
She's 2 now.
She's a little about 2 years old. The brightest, I can't believe it, you know, I can't believe it. So Bill says she's a chip off the old block. Okay. I think I've yacked enough to you today to try to give you a feeling of what I'm all about. I'm going to show you some pictures that sort of covers my career. The music, you will hear is music performed by me on the keyboards, because at the moment when we first started doing the ballet based on the life of Martin Luther King, they didn't have enough money for an orchestra yet, so I had to do it all on the keyboards myself. Eventually, we took it to the orchestra. But what you will hear is me on the keyboards, and what you will see is some of the things that I've covered in my lifetime. And after that, if there are any pictures Bill wants you to answer, I don't particularly want you to ask me any questions, he does. But first, I'll let you see what I've been up to. Thank you very much. I love you all for coming and thank you.